Hey there, this is Justin Hampton. I am the founder and CEO of the Compensation Tool, and I am joining you on another Comp Tool Tuesday. So I hope everybody had a nice long weekend and we're kind of back to it. At least a lot of people are. I know that there's a lot of people taking the full week off. So if you are back to work, hope you have a great short week. And if you're still out, then I don't know why you'd be watching this. You should go back to the beach, go back to the mountains, go back to your family, do whatever you were doing that is maybe more fun than work. But, we wanted to kind of talk about Comp Tool Tuesday and then talk about a couple of things that we saw and we found pretty interesting over the last week or so. And, one of the things I really like to walk through on our Comp Tool Tuesdays are the polls and the results of the polls that we have posted over the last week or so. And one of the ones that we posted 2 weeks ago and got nearly 1,000 votes. And again, my LinkedIn network is almost exclusively compensation practitioners. We don't have, a lot of, non-compensation people. I would say it's compensation folks and other HR professionals. So any of the results that we get are generally pretty strong in terms of reliability about who is participating. So one of the chats or one of the questions that we posted about 2 weeks ago and got about 1,000 votes on was, even though the question is a bit subjective, what is your cutoff for considering somebody at market? And I thought this was a pretty interesting question that we saw on one of the forums as a discussion point. And there were a couple different choices. Within 20% of the market median, within 10% of the market median, within 5% of the market median, or at or better, or at market median or above. And one of the things that I thought was a little bit interesting is that 20% of folks said, or I'm sorry, 11% of folks that responded said people below 20% of the market median could be considered at target, or at market rather. And I think it's important to think about what does this actually mean, because even though it is subjective, really what we wanted to ask was, what's that flag? When do you kind of throw a flag in the air and say, we probably need to take a look at these employees because they are, below market? And obviously this is going to vary based on an employee's experience, their tenure, the role they're in, the market data being used, the compensation philosophy, their performance. There is no perfectly right answer for this. But it really, generally speaking, we wanted to know, when do you throw the flag and say this person's out of whack? And about 1 out of 10 companies said that if you're below 20% of market median, that's when you throw the flag. Now, if we think about 20%, now many organizations will use a 40% range spread from the bottom to the top of their pay bands, and a 20% below median really is going to be near the bottom of the range for most organizations. And I would kind of come back and suggest that that's really not very competitive. 20% is going to take you years and years and years to catch up if you're adjusting your pay ranges and employees' pay. The next biggest lump, and the one that I have kind of seen most commonly, was within 10% of market median. So we saw actually about 43% of companies, or about 400 companies or 400 respondents, come back and say that they throw the flag and kind of say someone's not at market if they're below market median by more than 10%. And you got to keep in mind too, that's going to be a 0.9 comp ratio. So, I think we look at this and say, well, are they at market? And, is within 10% of market close to being paid, at market? And again, it goes back to where your folks are, kind of what your comp philosophy is, their experience, performance. But 43% said, within 10% of market, 19% said within 5%, and about a third, or almost a third, said, they don't consider an employee at market unless they are at market median or better, which I thought was a little bit of a funny and probably a poorly worded question when you think about that, because essentially the question is, when do you consider somebody at market? At market or better would really kind of tend to suggest that would be that cutoff point. But I think a lot of organizations practically and pragmatically are looking at employees and saying, if they're below 10% of market, 15% of market, 5% of market, 20% of market, those are the employees that we really want to focus on and make sure we're taking care of those folks. And we had some pretty interesting conversations on some of these. And I think, one of the big ones that came back was saying, that a lot of folks commented about that 10% rule. But a lot of folks really kind of said that it really depends on the employee. But you also need to take into consideration base, total target cash, total target direct comp. What are you actually looking at? Because there are some organizations that will target a 50th percentile for total target cash and the 75th percentile for base, or vice versa. And I think that really it's a really interesting look, and a lot of companies do this very differently. But as long as you're aligned to your compensation philosophy and kind of using that as the justification, the basis for how you're paying folks, that can really give you a good sense for how you would, or what employees you would look at being above or below market. So later on this week, last week, we also posted kind of a question around how do you price your jobs? Because I think if we're thinking about, how is somebody paid at market? Well, the market really can vary significantly based on the market data that you're using. And so one of the questions that I always think this is a really interesting one. I think it's one that we as compensation professionals deal with pretty frequently. And this question is, what data cut are you using when you're looking at those particular kinds of employees, or you're market pricing your jobs? And really, I want to know, are you looking at city level data, if that's applicable or if available? You're looking at regional data, if that's available? What about state level? What about the national sample plus geographic differential? And this one came out pretty close to what I expected. About 24% of folks are using city level data, if that's available. 12% using regional data, but only 5% are actually using state level data. Which, again, if you think about states like California, Texas, Washington, all these different states, they've got such varied rates of pay across the state that although using that number is or that region is, it's a little bit too big to be useful kind of across the board, but it's a little bit too small to be useful just across the total sample. So only 5% or 1 out of 20 companies are using the state level data, but the majority of companies, about 58%, are using the national data cuts plus a geographic differential. And I think this is one of the things that goes back to being a really interesting point of discussion too, is how do you calculate that geographic differential? Because not every salary survey is going to be using the same geographic differential. Every survey is built a little bit differently with different cohorts. And if you have a survey that is heavily West Coast weighted or heavily tech weighted, you may find that a lot of that geographic differential is already built into it. If you use a general industry survey that is evenly distributed across the U.S. or heavily weighted towards the middle America, or the not Central America, but the middle part of the United States, or Florida, or that part of the country, you may find that those numbers are a little bit different than the high tech company, where your national sample in one survey is going to be different than another survey. And there is a way you can actually calculate the geographic differential you want to apply per each survey. We actually have a tool like this, InComp tool, that will help you identify the built-in geographic differentials that we're seeing across different surveys. So, for example, you might find that one of those heavy tech surveys, you only need to apply a 4 or 5% geographic differential to a location like Seattle, and you maybe need to apply a 10% geographic differential to a higher cost of labor market like San Francisco. Whereas in another survey, you may need to apply a 10 or 15% geographic diff to Seattle, and then a 25% geographic differential to San Francisco. And Luz makes a really good point too. The type of job also drives the competitive market position. Critical or hard to fill jobs need to be paid more competitively, and I think this is absolutely true. There's actually an interesting discussion on the World at Work forum right now about internal equity versus market competitive stances. And it's a conversation about how do you kind of reconcile when two jobs have similar points, but the market data for one job is considerably higher than another job. And I think the example given was, a credit analyst and a software developer, whereas that credit analyst has a market rate, I'm just making this up, a market rate of $70,000, whereas the software developer has a market rate of $95,000. And the interesting discussion is, what's the right number for those jobs? How do you have two jobs that have the same points and the same kind of internal weighting, but such a large, 30% difference in how they're being paid? And, I think honestly, there are two different things we want to look at. There is your job, your point factor system, which is really specifically designed to look at the internal equities across different jobs. And your external market data is really designed to understand what's happening in that supply and demand of those critical or hard to fill jobs. And it's up to us as compensation practitioners to work with the business, other HR partners, line managers, hiring managers, to find out, what does career pathing look like? What does the market look like? Do we need to pay more for a credit analyst, for example, or do we need to pay less for the software engineer? And ultimately, I think there's no perfectly right answer for any of these approaches, but I think every answer is going to be different dependent upon the organization and the value of those jobs. But they are two very distinct areas of compensation that we have to consider and have to decide what makes the most sense for our organization. So it's a really interesting conversation. If you're not a member of the World at Work forum, or if you don't visit that or frequent that very often, it really does have a tremendous wealth of knowledge and great experts. Clay Johnson's on there all the time. He's an incredibly smart guy. He contributes a ton. Kim McLean are on there. Ned Smith is on there. So there's a really fantastic group of consultants that really do contribute to that World at Work forum very consistently and very thoroughly too. So if you're not on there, I would really suggest, pop it in there once a week. If you're a member of World at Work, it's going to be included. Definitely worth taking a look at. It's where I have grown, a lot of my own personal knowledge through that forum, and the great questions and great people that would answer questions as I was getting started. And now I try to be one of those people that answers lots of questions. So let's see. So speaking of questions, one of the other questions that came up, or one of the other conversations that we were having was, we had a couple of good memes, using the whole salary range to make hires. And this is very true. It's also very applicable to your current roles. I think that ultimately it goes back to making sure that your hiring managers, that your recruiting team, that your employees understand your compensation philosophy, where you pay what in the pay range, and how you decide what those pay ranges are. Really, really critical aspects. And one of the really disappointing things, one of our other previous surveys or previous polls, we kind of asked folks, how often do you have conversations and kind of inform employees about what those rates of pay are for their independent? How often do you have conversations about employees about their pay, excluding whenever the paychecks come through? I believe it was like 78% of folks came back and said they do that conversation once a year. The other 15%, 10, 12, 15% was twice a year. But that means about 90+% of employees are not being educated around the compensation philosophy, the pay philosophy, more than twice a year. So if you think about something that's very personal to everybody, very important to everybody, and really the biggest expense and probably one of the most misunderstood cost in an organization, we as compensation practitioners, we as businesses are probably not doing enough to really effectively communicate what that means. And one of the things that I actually used to do to really kind of help that was use every opportunity for a job family review to educate around that. And one of the things we would actually do with our line managers is we wouldn't one-off price a single job. We would always price an entire job family. And that would also allow us to kind of dig through the job hierarchies, making sure that the hierarchies were appropriately aligned, that employees had good career pathing. And then at the end of the day, when we would finish up that market job family review, we would present that to employees. And although it's not going to hit every employee every time it's done, but we would really be very thoughtful with bringing the leadership team in that was part of the job family review, setting up time with the employees that are on that team, walking through the compensation philosophy, walking through the job descriptions, walking through the leveling guidelines that we had, and making sure that they all understood what it took to go from a level 2 to a level 3 to a level 4, manager, senior manager, director, and making sure they understood that just because they may have the skills, if there's not a business need for that more senior level role, oftentimes we would need to wait until the business opportunity arose for that. And this is really kind of one of the things that we've recently rolled out in Comp Tool to really help out is we've actually, as you think about how job families are priced, you're usually pricing, your job family, your job accountant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, manager, senior manager, director, senior director. And oftentimes you're using the same matches with different levels. So Comp Tool last week we rolled out, or I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, but we formally announced it last week, that we now have a new feature in the Comp Tool that actually allows you to market price all of those job levels within a job family at once. And so what I can do is I can go in there, I can find a Mercer match and a Culpeper match and a Radford match and a WTW match for my accountant 1, say in my Austin marketplace. And then what I can do is I can do that match, assign my weightings, I can press a magic button, And the results will be the accountant 2, 3, 4, 5, manager, senior manager, director, senior director will actually have that same market data, but at the corresponding market survey levels priced out. So you can price that entire job family at once. And what's even cooler is there's another button you can press, and it's going to take all those jobs, all those matches, and you can do it in your, say, for example, your Austin market, but you can actually apply different geographic differentials or different market data cuts for San Francisco, for Houston, for Atlanta, for Chicago, for New York City, wherever it might be. So if you think about how much time you can save with this, it's been truly one of the more impressive things that we've kind of rolled out. So we designed back in 2017 and really foolishly decided not to roll it out until very recently. So it's kind of one of the thoughts that we have in terms of, as a comp person, we like to price jobs based on job families and kind of create that full consistency, that full kind of very linear approach to pricing jobs. And where we can do it, we've tried to make that as streamlined as possible. Let's see. So this has been a Comp Tool Tuesday. I think that really kind of rounds up what we wanted to talk through today. Again, my name is Justin Hampton. I'm the founder of the Compensation Tool. We've got Comp Tool, which is your market pricing and solution. And we've also got Squirrel, which is our real-time market data solution. We've got, I think, over 10 million data points now, ranging in the US. I believe we're rolling out the UK this week, Australia next week, India the week after that. All coming from employer-reported pay ranges and job postings. Truly one of the more fascinating kind of new data sources that compensation practitioners can and should be using to make sure they understand what it takes to be competitive. So if you're interested in it, give me a shout, Justin Hampton at compensationtool.com, or feel free to go to our site, comptool.com, and set up a demo. Again, thanks very much for joining, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks. Bye.